Hey everyone! In this video I'm going to show you the interactive music that I've written for the video game Angry Bots. At first we're going to take a look at my Wwise project so that I can explain to you how I've set up the interactivity of the music, and then in the second half we're going to play the game for a little bit so that we can see how all that music actually behaves in the gameplay. When thinking about which interactive music technique to use for this game, I decided early on to go with one that is called vertical remixing, which is basically a bunch of layers of music that can be put on top of each other and which create very seamless transitions when going from one game state to another. And that is exactly the reason why I chose this technique for this game, because as you can see right now in the gameplay, enemy encounters in this game are very frequent but also very short in duration, mostly less than 10 seconds. Super short, like here, 2 seconds mostly. So we need basically interactive music technique which can very quickly adapt to the action that is currently happening without being too distracting to the player. And vertical remixing is perfect for this task. Alright, let us now take a look at the Wwise session. For the vertical remixing system to work, we need to decide which control inputs of the game are going to have an influence on the various layers of music that we have. I decided to go with a 3-layer setup of music, and I set up 3 different game states to control these. As you can see here, we've got an explore state, a heavy combat state and a light combat state. We've also got an additional 4th state called Dead, but we'll talk more about it later. Basically, depending on which one of these 3 game states is active at a time, different combinations of layers will be triggered to play within the game. Let's take a look at the layers now. In our interactive music hierarchy, we've got a music switch container, and within that switch container we've got 3 different playlists. These are actually our 3 different layers for the vertical remixing system, and these are mapped to the game states that we've seen previously, so that layer 1 is connected to explore, layer 2 is connected to the light combat, and layer 3 is connected to the heavy combat state. Within our layer 1 playlist, which is the explore state, we can see that we've got a music track here. This is actually our main music cue for the whole game, and it's a 3.5-minute loop that will be always active whenever the players are running around the level. This is how it sounds. If you take a look at these, you can see we've got a bunch of different cue markers, but we'll talk about this later. Alright, so much for a first impression. Let's take a look at our layer 2 playlist. As we can see here, we've got 2 different music tracks going on at the same time. The first one is actually the same one we just listened to, and the second one is an additional layer of music that adds dissonance and creates a more intense sound by providing some dissonance and additional percussion. This is how they sound together. So as we've seen, this one is mapped to the light combat state. So this is the combination of layers that will be active whenever the player engages in combat with the normal enemies in the game. Alright, let's take a look at the third one. This is layer 3. And we can see we've got our first, all in all, we've got 3 different music tracks here. The first 2 are identical to the ones we've just listened to. And the third one provides even more percussion, some additional orchestral doublings for the melodies, and synth bass, a staccato synth bass. Let's listen to this part of the cue to hear it all in action. So this is layer 3 isolated and all together. To layer 2. And all 3 together. Okay, cool. Let's see what else we've got in the switch container. We've got a segment called Silence, which has no music track in it. It's completely silent, as the name suggests. And you might wonder why we have this here. We'll see later. It has a reason. Trust me on that. Apart from that, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different stingers. The first one is called Boss Active Stinger, and as you can imagine, this one is heard whenever the boss is activated. The boss is the big robot type. Yeah, whatever. You'll see him later. Then we've got 3 different stingers for the various computer hacks that you can do in the game. Let's see how this one sounds.
Access granted. Area 2 unlocked.
That's actually my voice, in case you were wondering. We haven't listened to the boss stinger. Let's listen to this one. Pretty simple, actually. Just to have something there. And finally, we've got a stinger for when the player dies, and this is how it sounds.
Regeneration complete.
Alright, that's it for the switch container. In order for Wwise to communicate with the game, we need to set up a few different events that can be fired from within the game. So let's head over to the Events tab and see what we have here. An event is basically a group of actions that will be executed by Wwise once the event is fired from within the game. So for example, once the level starts, our level start event will be called, which basically sets the state to explore. The game state is set to explore, and our switch container starts playing. So when the game starts, all this does is it starts playing our explore queue. This event also starts playing a playlist called Electronic Noise, which we haven't seen yet, but we'll get to this later. Let's see what other events we have here. We have a boss active event. So when the big boss robot is activated, this one is called, which sets the game state to heavy combat and triggers a boss active stinger. Once the boss is cleared, the game state is reset back to explore. Something similar happens with the enemies active event, which sets the game state to light combat, and once the enemies are clear, it's reset back to explore. Then we've got a bunch of different hack events. Every time a computer terminal is hacked in the game, these are called. So the first hack triggers the hack 1 stinger, and so on. Then we've got 5 different level part events. These are called when the player progresses throughout the levels and reaches different areas. And these could do different things, but in this case, all they do is they act as a failsafe to reset the game state back to explore in case one of the previous enemy encounters didn't do so already. Wwise has a very cool feature called the Soundcaster, which enables us to get kind of a preview of how the different events will influence our music playback in the game. So let's check it out. As we could see previously, the level start event is the first one to get fired once the game starts. And this is what happens. Pay attention to the player state, which is the game state. It's currently set to none. And once the level start event is fired, this is what happens. As you can see, the game state was immediately set to explore, and we can now hear our first layer of music playing. This is the explore cue. Then, when we encounter an enemy, the enemy's active event will be fired, and this is how it sounds. The game state was set to light combat, and our second layer of music faded in. Once the enemies are clear, the game state is reset back to explore, and the second layer of music faded out. Something similar happens when a boss active event is fired. This is when we encounter one of the big boss robots. The game state is set to heavy combat, and we can now hear all three layers of our vertical remixing system in work. You could also hear that this event fired the boss active stinger, which sounded like this. And once the boss is cleared, the game state is reset back to explore, and only our explore cue layer 1 is playing. Okay, cool. Contrary to the game events, which act more like momentary switches, we can see in the game syncs tab that we've got a game parameter available called player health. This parameter will be updated all the time as the player is taking damage by the enemies and his health slowly decreases, and it can be used to create much more gradual effects. For this project, I decided to use this parameter to achieve two different things. First of all, let's take another look at our switch container and head to the RTPC tab, which stands for Real-Time Parameter Control. We can see down here that we've got a voice low-pass filter effect, which is controlled by player health. And what this does is, as the player health decreases throughout the game, at one point, once it reaches 30, the low-pass filter will start to affect the sound. The other thing that is controlled by the player health parameter is the electronic noise playlist, which is a layer of special effects sounds which we haven't really looked at yet, but if we look at the RTPC tab, we can see that the voice volume, basically the volume of this special effects layer, is controlled by the player health parameter, so that at the beginning of the game, as the health is at 100% or 75 points, this layer will be completely silent, and as the health decreases at one point, this layer will start to slowly fade in. So let's take another look at the Soundcaster window to hear these effects in action. Okay, we start our game, and we start to encounter enemies. Then all of a sudden the boss appears. We're fighting, but our health is slowly going down, 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 and then suddenly you can hear the electronic noise kicking in and the low pass filter is active. And both of these effects are basically here to signal to the player that he's about to die, that maybe his spacesuit is failing, and that he's being overrun by robots. Okay, cool. Let's take another look at the Events tab to check out one final event that we haven't looked at yet, which is the player die event. As you can imagine, this one is fired when the player dies in the game, and what it does is, as you can see, it's a bit complicated here. We've got lots of actions going on at the same time. The first one of these is the stop all action, which basically stops all music from playing back, or actually it fades out the music in 2 seconds of time to create a bit of a smoother transition. Then for the second action, it sets the state to dead, so the game state is set to dead, and it restarts playing our switch container containing our vertical remixing layers and the electronic noise special effects layer. At the same time, it triggers a stinger called player die, and then, and this is very important, it resets the game state to explore, but it does this with a delay of 2 seconds, which is very important because if we didn't do this with a delay, then this set state and this set state action both would happen at the same time basically, and this wouldn't be good because it would have an effect on the transitions that I've planned for this project, which we'll take a look at next. So as you can see here, we've got 2 kinds of transitions that will be happening in the game. The first one is the generic transition that happens anytime that any source music is going to any destination music. And this practically deals with all of our layer switching in our vertical remixing system. So anytime that one playlist of layers goes to another playlist of layers, this is the transition that will happen. And what's set up here is we can see that the currently playing playlist will immediately stop to play with a fade out of a length of 1 second. And the destination, for example, if you're going from layer 1 playlist to layer 2 playlist, the layer 2 playlist will fade in with a fade in time also of 1 second. And you can see that these kind of overlap in the middle. And the important thing here is that the layer 2 playlist will then sync to the same time as playing segment, which basically means that when the layer 2 playlist starts to play, it will exactly start at the same spot in time where layer 1 playlist stopped. So the second transition that we have here, on the other hand, deals with only one special occasion, and that is when we're going from the silence segment to the layer 1 playlist, which is basically our explore queue. When does this happen? This is always the case when the player died and the game is restarted. If you remember from what we've seen previously, the silence segment is actually completely silent. As the name suggests, there's no music track in it. And it is mapped to the game state called dead, which is active once the player dies. So when the player dies, the music is faded out and we only hear silence. Then, as the game is restarted, the layer 1 playlist starts to play, the game state is set to explore. We can start to hear our explore queue, and the transitions, the transition that happens between the silence and the explore queue is set up so that the explore queue fades in with a fade in time of 5 seconds, and this is the important thing, it starts to sync to a random queue. What does this mean? If you remember when we looked at the layer 1 playlist, you could see that we have 4 different queue markers here. The first one is the main start of the queue, but we've also got 3 alternate starting points. So what is actually happening here? The player is dying, and when the game restarts, the silence is transitioning to the explore queue, but it does not always start at the beginning of the queue, but every time this happens, a random cue point will be selected so that the music starts from a different point. And this is very cool because sometimes when players die often, they get very frustrated when they hear the same music cue start to replay at the same exact spot every time. Okay, let us take one final look at the Soundcaster window to see how this transition sounds. We start our game. The player is running around the level, and all of a sudden he dies.
Regeneration complete.
Awesome. So you heard the music stop, the player die stinger was played, and and then the explore queue restarted, but it did not start at the actual beginning of the queue, but at one of the randomly selected custom queues. Perfect! Alright, we've talked enough. Now it's finally time to see how the music sounds in the game. Let's play. That's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting. See you around.